Jack was a seasoned investigator, known for his sharp mind and relentless pursuit of justice. His cases were legendary. He had a knack for seeing what others missed: a misplaced cigarette butt that others would overlook, a scuff mark on the floorboards that told a story only he could read. He could piece together the narrative of a crime scene like a writer crafting a story, each clue a word, each detail a sentence, but none were more haunting than the case that would define his career. It was like reading a story written in a language he didn't understand, filled with cryptic symbols and hidden meanings. Jack as Jack. It all started with a series of seemingly unconnected robberies, each more puzzling than the last. The victims, all prominent citizens, reported strange items stolen: an antique music box that played a haunting melody, a taxidermied snowy owl with glassy eyes, a vintage medical textbook on hysteria, random, bizarre, unexplained, each item more peculiar than the last. There was one constant, one chilling detail that connected each of these otherwise random burglaries, a thread of darkness weaving through them, a single sentence scrawled on the wall in what looked like charcoal, a message left behind: Jack as Jack. The shadows are hungry. The words echoed in his mind. Jack stared at the message, trying to decipher its meaning. A shiver crawled down his spine, a sense of dread settling in. This was no ordinary thief. This was something else, something far more sinister, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. The first robbery happened at the estate of Mr. Alastair Cavendish, a renowned antiquarian. The stolen item: a taxidermied snowy owl perched on a silver branch. It was a peculiar and rare piece, one that Mr. Cavendish had acquired from an expedition to the Arctic. Valuable, yes, but an odd choice for a thief. Why would someone go through the trouble of stealing such an unusual item? The second robbery took place at the home of Dr. Emily Carter, a celebrated psychiatrist. Her home was filled with rare books and artifacts from her travels. The stolen item? A vintage medical textbook from the Victorian era focusing on hysteria and psychosomatic illnesses. Again, an unusual choice. This book was not just rare, but also held significant historical value in the field of psychiatry. Jack as Jack. The third robbery was at the home of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a retired concert pianist. Her home was a treasure trove of musical history. The stolen item? An antique music box that played a haunting lullaby. This music box had been passed down through generations in her family. A pattern was emerging, but I couldn't quite grasp it. Each item was unique, valuable, and held a deep personal significance to its owner. It felt like trying to catch smoke. The clues were elusive, and the connections between the items were not immediately clear. What connected an owl, a medical textbook, and a music box? The items seemed unrelated at first glance, yet there had to be a link. The victims themselves offered no insights. They were as baffled as the detective. They had no enemies, no debts, no connections to the criminal underworld. Their lives were peaceful and unremarkable. Jack ran his hand through his hair. The frustration was mounting. He felt a growing sense of unease. There was something more to these thefts, something he couldn't yet see. This case was like a puzzle box, and he couldn't find the key. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to lead to more questions rather than answers. As Jack delved deeper into the case, he began noticing strange things. He would misplace his keys only to find them in the refrigerator. He'd forget entire conversations, feeling like chunks of his memory were missing. Jack as Jack. At night, I swore I heard whispers, faint and chilling, at the edge of my hearing. The air in my apartment grew heavy, colder than it should be, even for a London winter. I started seeing shadows move in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I turned to face them directly. He initially dismissed these occurrences as stress and fatigue, but as they intensified, he began to wonder if the case was affecting him more deeply than he cared to admit. He felt a presence watching him, toying with him. The victims, too, reported similar experiences. They spoke of nightmares, cold spots in their homes, and the feeling of being watched. Jack as Jack. Dr. Carter, the psychiatrist, called it a shared delusion, a psychic contagion. I wasn't so sure. I pored over the case files, searching for a connection, a common thread, and then I found it. All three victims had a grandparent who had been a patient at the same institution, Cranbrook Mental Asylum. Cranbrook was a place of whispers and shadows. It had been shut down decades ago after a fire, shrouded in rumors of patient abuse and experimental treatments. Jack felt a pull towards Cranbrook. He knew with a certainty that defied logic, that the answer to the mystery lay within those crumbling walls. He secured a warrant and set off for the asylum, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. Section 5: Echoes of Fear. The drive to Cranbrook was bleak. The asylum was nestled deep in the English countryside, shrouded by ancient trees that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The wind howled through the broken windows, sounding like the mournful cries of forgotten souls.
As I stepped inside, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and a palpable sense of dread.
Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the grime-covered windows. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath Jack's feet. He wandered through the decaying corridors, past padded cells and rusted medical equipment. The air was thick with the echoes of fear, the lingering residue of unimaginable suffering. He could almost hear the whispers of the past, the moans of the forgotten souls who had once inhabited this place. Section 6, the Ritual Chamber. This was a place shrouded in mystery and dark history. He found it in the asylum's basement, concealed behind a wall that looked undisturbed for decades. The discovery was accidental, a result of a loose brick revealing a hidden passage, a hidden chamber lit by flickering candles. The dim light cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. The stolen artifacts were arranged in the center of the room, forming a bizarre altar. Each item seemed to have a story, a dark past that added to the room's ominous feel. The owl, the book, the music box. These items were not just random trinkets, they were carefully chosen, each with a specific purpose in the ritual. A shiver ran down his spine. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, making every hair on his body stand on end.
The air was heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. It felt as if the room itself was alive, watching, waiting.
Symbols were etched into the floor, strange and ancient-looking. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, glowing faintly in the candlelight. He recognized some of them from his cursory research into the occult, but these seemed different, older, more sinister. They hinted at rituals long forgotten, practices that were meant to stay buried. He heard a noise behind him, a soft chuckle. It was almost mocking, sending a chill through his very core. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. Standing in the doorway was a figure shrouded in shadow, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The figure exuded an aura of menace, a silent threat that was impossible to ignore.
The man held a book in his gloved hands, the stolen medical textbook. His grip was firm, and his eyes gleamed with a knowledge that was both dangerous and forbidden. "You've been expecting me, Detective."
Who are you?
"A servant."
The figure replied, stepping into the flickering candlelight. His face was gaunt, etched with lines of fatigue or perhaps something more sinister.
"A collector of sorts."
A collector of stolen artifacts?
Jack scoffed. He needed to keep the man talking, distract him. He was out of his element here, in this chamber of shadows and whispers.
"These are not just artifacts, Detective. They are keys, tools, and they will help me open the door."
A door to what?
Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper.
"To a power beyond your comprehension, Detective. A power that feeds on fear itself."
Jack felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't about robbery. This was something far more dangerous. This man was delusional, unhinged. He had to stop him. As if sensing his thoughts, the man began to chant in a language that twisted around the edges of Jack's understanding. The air grew colder, the shadows in the room seeming to writhe and coil like living things. Jack raised his gun, but the man simply laughed, a hollow, echoing sound.
"You cannot stop what has already begun, Detective."
He rasped, his eyes glowing with an eerie light.
"The shadows are hungry, and they will have their due."
The shadows around them deepened, swirling faster, reaching towards Jack like grasping claws. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, paralyzing him. He tried to move, to speak, but he was frozen, trapped in a nightmare. The following morning, Jack's car was found abandoned near the gates of Cranbrook Asylum. The engine was still running, the driver's side door wide open. His phone and wallet were inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. The authorities conducted a thorough search of the asylum and the surrounding grounds, but they found no trace of Detective Inspector Jack Hartigan. He had vanished, disappeared, without a trace, swallowed whole by the shadows that clung to the walls of Cranbrook. The case of the stolen artifacts remained unsolved, adding another layer of mystery to the already infamous asylum. The stolen items were never recovered. The cryptic message, "The shadows are hungry," became a chilling reminder of the detective who had vanished while investigating the case. Some whispered that Jack had finally cracked under the pressure, had staged his disappearance to escape the darkness that had seeped into his life. Others believed he had stumbled upon something sinister, something ancient and evil, and had paid the ultimate price for his curiosity. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Detective Inspector Jack Hartigan was gone. His case, like the shadows that haunted Cranbrook Asylum, remained unsolved, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left buried. And in the hushed tones reserved for ghost stories, the legend of Detective Jack was passed down through the ranks of the police force. A cautionary tale of a good cop, a seasoned investigator, who had stared into the abyss and been consumed by the darkness he found there. The shadows, it seemed, were always hungry,